on the council. Okay, so we'll call the meeting to order at 7:32 on May 13th. Is Keith present?
Yeah, I believe I saw his number. Just give me a second to unmute, to ask him to unmute. Ask to unmute. Okay. Okay, so, yeah, he's coming on now.
Hello, everyone. This is Keith, the weatherman, speaking.
Hi, Keith.
And I want to wish everyone a very pleasant good evening. Susan, Todd, Arthur, Katja, Niles, and Jeff. And I know, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Because hopefully at this time next month, we're all going to be together in the office. That's the way it looks. And weather-wise, we're looking good also. Some very pleasant weather through most of the weekend. There could be some showers later in the weekend, but what I will tell you is that it will be feeling like summer a week from now. And we're going to have some above normal temperatures in the low to mid 80s. And it's going to be very dry. Very little rain expected here after Sunday and Monday. Probably right through Memorial Day and beyond. So that's what you want to expect in the foreseeable future. And speaking of the foreseeable future, I've heard some very, very good news about things opening up today. We're headed in a very positive direction, and when my turn comes up again with the engagement committee, I'd like to address that. So thank you. Enjoy the beautiful spring weather, everyone.
Thanks very much, Keith. Good forecast. But it sounds like the gardeners better be prepared to water those plants.
Yes, absolutely. Hear that, Arthur?
Okay. Thanks, Keith.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
So now we have an opportunity to hear resident comments. We do ask that residents state their name and street for the record. And I guess you will need to make a request to have Niles unmute you.
Yeah, just raise your hand. Okay.
Raise your hand.
I think I see one, so I'm going to ask to unmute, and we'll start here.
Okay.
Thanks, Niles. Council, this is Tiffany Cisna on Briley Lane. I was glad to hear Keith's discussion about community events. I just wanted to put a plug in that if the park is open, if the county is issuing permits, I think it would be great if the village would get the permits going for July 4th, the usual event, and the movie in September. You know, I know that some folks might not yet be comfortable getting out and about, but if the county is issuing the permits, I think it would be great if the village would offer that as an event for residents who are comfortable attending. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Anyone else? Yeah, I see another hand up. So Marty is next. So I just asked you to unmute, Marty.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This question is a quick one for Doug Lohmeyer and the council, but I also have some procedural questions for the election counting procedures. So let me just do the simple question first. I sent an email to the council earlier this week asking about that house, the big house on Taylor and Delfield, and whether the council will enforce the standard 10-foot driveway width. And hadn't heard back yet, so I'm asking it now. What's the intention on do we have a double wide garage? Can we at least enforce the standard 10-foot driveway width?
Okay, I think there might have been a misunderstanding on who was communicating. Actually, the 10-foot driveway width ordinance pertains to materials of the same surface, and there can be an extended side addition of another material.
So
that permits a wider than 10 foot, and there are many examples in the village where the driveway is actually wider than 10 feet and is perfectly according to code.
So the plan is to allow that wider driveway here?
So I'll just address that just straight from what Doug had provided me some information. So according to the plan that was submitted, they're approved for a 10-foot wide brick driveway. And then they also asked for two side, have concrete on either side of that 10-foot wide driveway for 3 feet on each side. Under the code, they have to, you can have things of different widths next to each other, but the driveway itself, it cannot be more than 10 feet of one material. Okay, and that has been in the code since 2015. Now they also have to conform to the non-vegetative surface requirement, which is also according to the plan they met as well when they submitted it. So that's just the technical part of that.
So
And,
it'll be 16 feet wide with the two materials.
right.
Okay, thank you. I'll hold off on the election rules questions for later.
Good. Okay, anyone else?
Yes. First, John McDonald, I think. I'm asking you to unmute. So, okay, good.
Okay. Yeah, good evening. John McDonald, Summit Avenue, longtime resident. Regarding the proposed tree ordinance, there's a reference in it to, see, section 6-303 to a sediment control permit. That's not, I didn't see any definition of that. So I think it might be useful if there was a footnote or an annotation to the Montgomery County Code or regulations laying out the meaning of it, the requirements of it.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you.
And then I think who I next saw was Susan Kahn, and then we'll go to Naomi. I think that makes sense from what I saw.
Okay, Susan?
Oh, hi. I'm gonna put my little thing because you said I have 2 minutes and I just want, or whatever. I had the occasion a couple of months ago to talk to somebody in another state who was kind of distraught. She woke up and found a cell tower in front of her home, and it was a large kind of pole, pretty larger than your usual telephone pole, I guess. And she was upset because she's a cancer survivor and her husband and her children play in the yard, and they were immediately concerned about health effects. But they thought, well, this isn't the end of the world and we can even leave this neighborhood. And then they were immediately distraught to find out that this could really affect the value of their homes, because not many houses on the street had a cell antenna right in front of it. So I really felt for her. And I was concerned. I thought, we're so lucky we live here. We're notified when things happen. We have our own village ordinance that's kind of an insulating permitting process if something happens. And then I found out about ZTA 1907, which is proposed at the county level to allow within 30 feet of your home a cell antenna and a pole that can be constructed without any resident notification, without any hearing, and without even telling your municipality at all. And I actually had to read it again. I thought, no, this can't be right. I went through the very specifics of this ordinance again. I cannot believe there's no hearing, no resident notification, and there really isn't. So, and it totally bypasses our municipality, which I think we have a right to know what's going on our polls and such. So it really flagged it for me. And then I've also had occasion in the last few years to hear what's going on in the county at different hearings about other ZTAs. And there's this one person, this family in Potomac, they keep coming back because they got a cell pole about 50 feet tall within like 30 feet of their home, put without a permit, no permit whatsoever for that location, that height, those antennas. And she's been trying for 10 years to get that moved. And it's stunning. She goes to council meeting after council meeting. And there seems to be a real problem in the county with oversight. And when people started making notes on the list, okay, about what's it called, de-incorporation, I thought, oh, once people realize how important it is to be in a village because they protect us, you know, that'll be blown out of the water. But then with this ZTA 1907, it kind of eviscerates, if I understand correctly, our own ordinance. And so I just wanted to encourage you to find out from Ron Bolt, you know, our municipal law attorney, about what this would do to our own ordinance, and also to find out from legal expertise in telecom law what this means for our village residents, because I think it's really important to learn about it. And finally, there is no issue about 5G infrastructure whatsoever in our county. It already exists. It's not about do we want 5G or do we not? It exists already. The question is, do you want a cell tower directly in front of your home to give you additional 5G spectrum? Because if you look at the coverage maps, we've already got it. But if you want additional, do you want that? Or do you want a cell antenna out on Connecticut Avenue that can reach us, because it can reach us, for 5G spectrum? Which do you want? Which do you allow? And finally, for the tree ordinance, this relates. When these are put up, trees interfere with the transmissions. So are they going to have the right, and this is a question maybe for Monty Boland or for Arthur, whoever's dealing with the trees, will they have the right to prune back and cut our trees if they block their transmissions? And it can happen on any pole that they put an antenna. So that's just another little wrinkle. So until they have better oversight in the county for their own cell towers, I don't think they have any business kind of with us kind of making a free-for-all for them to come in here and take over kind of any cell pole, putting a utility pole or light pole and making it 10 feet higher and making it wider with equipment cabinets and not really providing oversight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Would anyone else like to make a comment? Naomi?
Yeah.
Right.
Hang on one second. I'm asking you to unmute. Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So I want to make a suggestion for the council to debate, if not before the election results, then afterwards. Number one question, should sitting council members be allowed to endorse and or campaign for any running candidates? If not illegal, is it appropriate? Does it inject bias into the election? If so, is it unethical? When 3 out of 5 council members endorse and or campaign for running candidates, does that comprise a quorum of the council? If so, does that endorsement represent the full council? Would the full council be permitted to endorse and or campaign for a running candidate? Are these questions appropriate to present to the ethics committee, given our new ethics ordinance? And can we have an analysis made by our counsel, Ron Bolt, about this topic? Thank you for listening and for recording these questions.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I think we next had Andrew here, so I'm going to ask him to unmute.
Andrew?
Hi, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. 3 quick items related to the election, of course, as expected. One, just stating again for the record that I think there's no reason either in the village charter or any ordinance that would not allow for the election committee to extend the deadline of the receive by deadline for ballots. As recently as yesterday, I believe, a resident has suggested that she had not received a new ballot and that by the time that she may receive it, it'd be too late to send off in terms of postmark and receipt date. So I don't understand why there's this level of rigidity in not allowing for that deadline to be extended, just to make sure that we allow for every vote to be counted. So again, I want to just state that for the record, that this is a concern that several of us who are running have expressed. Also, I don't know if there's a formal recount mechanism. Would be interested to hear from the council and or election committee to look at that, given that there's 6 candidates and 2 slots, and past elections have shown how tight the margins have been. And then finally, I just want to piggyback on what Naomi just said. So I hate to fill up more of the time, but one of the rules and procedures in for the election committee is that candidates' materials may not imply, suggest, or give the impression of any official endorsement by the Village of Martin's Additions. It's something I raised as well, and I would ask that the incoming council, regardless of who wins these 2 seats, consider adding rules to prohibit sitting or outgoing council members and election committee members from publicly endorsing candidates. If one claims as a council member that one is engaging in a private capacity, then I would assume that an election flyer that suggests that the candidate was endorsed by someone on the council would not have the title. It would say Joe Smith, private citizen, and not Joe Smith, council chair or council member. So I would ask that be considered, and for various reasons that members would recuse themselves in any future election. I think it makes common sense. And as Naomi put it, there wouldn't be any kind of indication of bias during that process. And having sitting members phone bank and hold meetings and election events, I think is just completely inappropriate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Would anyone else like to, Katie?
I saw John Sharrow first, but you can go
John
either way.
Sharrow, sorry.
Sorry.
Not used to this new system
Yeah.
of Niles unmuting.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm John Sherrow on Chestnut Street. I'm interested in finding out if the council has done any action on the walkability issues that we put forth from our previous recommendations. This may be addressed to Arthur, but here again, perhaps you may know something, Susan, as well.
There will be an update during Niles's manager's report, but yes, we are continuing to work on those.
Thank you. Thank you.
You all did great work.
Okay. Now it's Katie, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Am I good? Hi. Katie Flipcheck Howard, Taylor Street. An election question. This is the last day for postmark ballots. I just wondered, I guess it's more for Niles or the election committee, where are we in terms of, did everyone who needed a corrected ballot receive them in time on spoiled ballots? Do you have an update on that at this stage of the last day to postmark it, mail it in?
I think that's probably going to be contained within the election committee report, and if not, Niles will supplement.
Okay, and one other just concern I wanted to bring up. I've talked to a couple of residents who are hearing impaired or deaf, and they are wondering if we continue to do these meetings over Zoom, is there any way you can include closed caption for people who are hearing impaired?
To that answer, I do believe that there is a setting for that. Let me do more look into how that works. Some of Zoom's things are counterintuitive, so just let me look into that, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Anyone else? Larry, I guess.
Hang on one second. Asked to unmute. There we go.
Yes. So I lost my connection, so I don't know. Has there been any comment about being able to speak when we do when you do the session on the elections?
I think if you have election questions, it's best to pose them now, and the election committee will field them when they give their report later this meeting. In about 20 minutes, if we stick approximately to schedule.
That's going to make it pretty hard we have to guess what the comments are going to be during that time.
Well, if you have a specific question, you can ask it now, and I'm sure that if other questions arise that haven't been addressed, then we can address them at that time. How's that?
That's great. That sounds
Thank you.
reasonable. And I also wanted to say I 100% endorse Andrew's comments.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Nope. Shoot.
I think we need to reset the timer.
Yes, I just noticed that myself. I apologize. Stop. Okay, timer is ready to go. Was there anybody else? I'm looking. I don't see anybody with their hand raised virtually or otherwise. Wait, hang on. Marty, hang on. I'm gonna see Marty put her hand up again. So just give me 1 second. All right.
Okay, thank you. Since you said we should do some election questions now.
Mhm.
Niles, one election question I have is, has the vendor, Eclectic, been instructed to do a machine count on all of the votes not cast, the ones left blank on the undervoted ballots? Have they been given that instruction? Have you done that yet?
So, per what the election committee, so the short answer is once the procedures are approved, I did have a preliminary conversation with Electech about the procedures. What I'm going to do is because the procedures have to be approved by the council, and that's what's going to happen today, I'm going to have a follow-up conversation with him after that where we go through everything step by step, including that, since that was included, since that was a question that was brought up with the committee meeting. Does that make sense?
Yes, I would strongly recommend that we continue the past practice that we've had in the village for many years now, which is a complete 100% count of all the votes, as in 300 people voting, 2 candidates, all 600 votes are accounted for, including votes not cast. That needs to be part of the machine count in order to have a clean election. So I very strongly recommend that the vendor be instructed to do that on the machine count. Second question for you, on election issues. We had a question, a number of the candidates had a question about if any ballot return envelopes are disqualified or rejected for any reason. The candidates sent a letter to the election committee and the council saying that we would like to know how many rejected ballots there might be, on what grounds each one was rejected, and whose ballots, the names on those ballots that were rejected, if there are any. Last year there were none rejected. This year there may be some. And the election packet that's included with this council meeting packet says that the committee will not report the number of rejected envelopes. So the question there is, a number of candidates have said in writing that we would like to know those details about all the rejected envelopes, a full accounting of them. And the next piece, in terms of what was proposed in the packet for this meeting tonight, the election accounting rules, the 513 packet here says that only the valid ballot envelopes will be secured and kept, not the rejected envelopes or the so-called provisional ballots. And my understanding is that state law requires that we keep all election-related materials. So the question on that issue is, will in fact we comply with state law on retention, document retention, and amend the packet tonight, the election rules tonight, to say that all ballot envelopes, rejected or accepted, will in fact be secured and kept for a possible future audit or whatever. So I have a series of questions like this that are technical details but are important. And the final one that I have at this point, I may have more when we get to the discussion, but I thank you for taking these down now, is the 100% reporting. The Village of Martin's Additions has a very strong, good election procedure and history of reporting 100% of the votes. And this packet that was included with the meeting packet tonight from the election committee does not say that they will report 100% of the votes at all. It doesn't say that they will have the vendor, count the number of votes left blank. It doesn't say that they'll do 100% reporting. And given the problems with the voter roll and the non-recording of the first forum and some of the other election issues that have come up, including, I second Andrew's point about the unorthodox and unprecedented business of having council members endorse candidates and campaign for them. I was shocked to see that. But I think given that there have been so many questions about the election procedures this year, I think it's absolutely essential that we have complete transparency, 100% vote reporting, and the packet, the vote counting packet included in tonight's materials does not specify that. So I would ask very strongly that we do that to build community confidence in the integrity of this election. I think it's really essential to account for 100% of all the envelopes that come in, rejected envelopes, accepted ballot envelopes, at every vote. And having 100% reporting. Again, it's consistent with our very strong past practice, and it is really, I think, essential this year, given all the election questions, to build public confidence. So there may be more questions, but I hope that the election committee got all those down and will answer them all in turn. And in closing, I would just say that I have been very concerned about the perception of bias by having a quorum of the council, 3 council members, endorse candidates, which is absolutely unprecedented in the Village of Warren's traditions. Literally, I know no one who has ever said that it's ever happened here before, and I was quite taken aback to see it happen this year. When your council chair, the council liaison to the election committee, and a quorum of the council endorse and campaign for candidates, it's very hard for me to see how that does not violate the election regulations, the election ordinance, which prohibits any candidate's materials from saying that they're endorsed by VMA. So I really think that Ron needs to address that, and I echo Naomi's comment about, is this something that the ethics ordinance, the new ethics ordinance would apply to? And if it doesn't apply here, if the ethics ordinance doesn't apply here, what would that bias provision apply to? If not,
Well, I can tell you what it might apply to, if you'll just let me intervene for a second. It might apply, just as a rough example, to an election committee chair designating a candidate she wants to run, and then perhaps doing something to apply rules in a way that might advantage a candidate.
Are you saying that you did that with the candidates Andrew and Alex, Brian and Alex this year?
I have nothing to do with deadlines. No,
that didn't make sense to me, Susan.
I'm actually thinking of past elections.
Well, I know of no such case in past elections, but
okay, we'll move on then. Does anyone else have a question? Yeah, did you have a question, Jeff? Oh, sorry, you raised your hand. I thought you were.
Oh, well, I don't have a question, but, oh, Larry, I see Larry's hand is raised, so I'd like the residents to go before I comment.
All right.
Larry?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Susan, I really object to your comments.
Okay.
You have absolutely, that is just borderline unethical what you're doing right now. If you want to besmirch somebody and make a statement, you'd better be able to stand behind it.
I am.
You're not making that accusation about me, but I'll tell you something. I will support the legal fees for somebody that wants to come against you for that. That is inexcusable, and it's part of why this village is in such a mess right now.
I think you have an incomplete picture of why the
No, I don't.
Mess, but I think, having said that, we should perhaps move on. But let me just tell you, I am a lawyer, and I do know what defamation is. I do know what receipts are in terms of evidence. So you should be aware that I would not make accusations lightly. Okay, can we just move on?
Sure, Susan. This is Jeff. Unless Niles, are there any more residents who have their hands up?
I do not see any. I'm just double checking, and I do not. All right.
Great. I'll make this relatively brief because I appreciate that there's a long agenda, and I do want to apologize to the residents. I have a hard stop at 8:50. I know that the agenda is expected to cut off then, but I do need to drop. So I apologize because I know that the meetings do tend to go a bit longer than the official agenda, and I'll stick on as long as I can. I just wanted to comment a couple things very briefly. Tiffany, I totally appreciate your thought around the July 4th event, and I think the only thing we could consider, maybe it's, the safety task force could just look into it with Niles, is I think we all recognize that children under 12 will not have access to vaccines by then, so there still is a group, while it's still low risk, and so it's just something for us to consider as we look at opening up July 4th versus the fall, where I would hope that those vaccines are available to perhaps children 6 and above. The other piece, which again, I wanna state this in a way that is not meant to be confrontational or adversarial. I appreciate Susan Kahn's note. I think it was on the listserv around just the idea of wellness and, you know, conflict. And so this is not meant in that capacity, but I'll just say this is, look, you know, I don't know the laws and I'm not a lawyer. This is more of a sniff test for me. And I can just say for me, as a person, as Jeff Blander, whether it's council member or someone who is incumbent, I'm pledging two things for next year. This is not meant to be codified. It's just how I believe things should shake out. First, for me, if I plan to run or not, I expect to make a public announcement a few weeks before candidate statements are in. So everyone who might be considered to run would have the same information and it's an even playing field. Second, what also I think, again, I personally, you know, wouldn't look to endorse anyone, but I appreciate, you know, that's a nothing burger. People like to endorse, people like to, you know, have their candidates win. But again, as a personal pledge, because I can't necessarily say I would never do it, but I think the idea is to wait as a council member until at least after the forums to give everyone a chance. And then the last thing I'll just say on this is, you know, again, I think this is probably would have been a nothing burger pre-ethics ordinance because, you know, folks can do what they want. And, you know, this is pretty much what happens, I think, in local politics, quite frankly, across the country. But I do think that with the ethics ordinance and the idea of quote unquote impartiality, and if I remember, the intent was to protect the village from possible things that could influence the village for years to come. You know, it's just something that I think is interesting to investigate or look at perhaps going forward, because this is all new to us. I think there's a lot of things about the new ethics ordinance that quite frankly isn't codified. And just looking at it and looking at impartiality, I personally would have been like, I don't know. Can I do that? Because I'm not a lawyer, and I appreciate others are, but all I'm saying is, you know, for next year, I take a personal pledge. I leave it to others to do. And with that, oh, and one final thing, Niles, we've got this real fancy new subscription to Zoom now, is my understanding.
So, yeah, we extended it just a little bit to include it, make it larger, the number of people who can attend meetings and other things. Just to part of this came from the candidate forum and doing all of that stuff.
Awesome. And so one thing I was going to ask, and we can take it up because I don't want to take up any more time. I do apologize. Is what about the video feature? I know at in U.S. State Department, for example, we use the video all the time and then post it for the public record. Right. I was just curious if that is something that we will be doing going forward. And thanks so much. I'll turn it back to our chair.
Thank you. Okay, so next on the agenda, Doug's report. If Doug is available.
Yes. Hang on. Hang on 1 second. Okay. Doug, I'm asking you to unmute, so it should let you unmute. There we go.
All right, I'm here.
Okay.
Good evening. Yes, good evening. At 3506 Bradley, they've submitted a permit for a demolition and a new house. The county has not issued that permit, so that project is still on hold. At 7220 Delfield, the county has issued the permit, and the village permit is pending. That should be released shortly for the demolition and construction of a new house. And work is underway at 7200 Chestnut, 7200 Delfield, 3515 Raymond, 3517 Shepherd, and at 7203 Summit. One final item is a while back, the village had submitted a letter to the state highway asking for safety features to be placed along Brookville Road at Bradley and I believe at Taylor. And this week, the village sent another letter to the state requesting an update on the progress of those safety features, and we haven't heard back. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Doug.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, so next, approval of minutes. So would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes for last month? Arthur?
I'm asking you to unmute, Arthur.
Yes, I move to approve the minutes from last month.
We have a second? Todd?
I'll
Todd?
second that.
All in favor? Aye.
All right.
I think we got it.
Yeah.
Another unanimous vote.
All right.
Love it when we get unanimity. Okay, so next discussion and next steps on the village tree ordinance.
Susan, one short thing is just the committee updates. Do you want to I know.
Yeah, we have the safety report before we get to, the only other one is election, right?
And then Keith wanted to make a couple of comments for community engagement. That's why I was trying to do that.
Right,
So let's
do the committee first. We'll do Keith.
Yep. All right, I'm asking Keith to unmute, so.
Okay, I'm unmuted now, so pleasant good evening to everyone once again. Very briefly, we're going to go for the Independence Day celebration. I'm going to ask Niles, or I can do it myself, to get the permits ready here by no later than June 1st. So all systems are go, and this is going to be a great celebration, the biggest and best of ever, because of what we've had to deal with over the past year. So thank you, everyone. We've got a lot to look forward to, and God bless the village and all of our residents. Thank you. From Keith.
Thank you, Keith. Okay, now Jeff has a quick update on the public safety task force.
Yeah.
Sure, thanks. I promise to make this brief. First of all, I just want to acknowledge Arthur and then everyone on the task force. I know Naomi is online, there may be some others, but just really, they've been working so hard, and weekends and various follow-up administrative items since the last open meeting. And my expectation is that I believe in the next June open meeting, there'll be a presentation on the survey in terms of where we are, and perhaps even moving forward on that in short order. So it was really meant to be just a short update. I think one thing that might be interesting for us to consider is, given the ZTA ordinance and the number of residents who have raised some concern or at least interest, is perhaps this might be something the task force could work with Niles and Ron, at least on a fact-finding mission about what possibly our village can do in terms of whether it's protections or just things around placement. Because the understanding is that the latest version of the ZTA again has gone a bit more aggressive than what the other version was, and I think that this would be something around fact finding that we would all be very interested in. So I would like to see that. I assume Ron is going to go forward, if not already, in researching this, and I think it would be nice to have someone from the task force perhaps be part of that, at least from an informational standpoint. Thanks. And back to you, Sue.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so discussion of the possible ordinance. Arthur, you want to lead this?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the tree ordinance is ready to be adopted, but there has been some questions about whether we need some additional research. on it. I'm not sure what the research is intended to show. On the question that was raised earlier, I keep by McDonald, I adopted the county language when putting this together. In that language, they do not define what a sediment permit is. So I just took that, but it's, it may be appropriate to do it. If you are going to move more than a certain cubic amount of cubic feet of earth.
Oh, I'm just going to mute Keith. Sorry about that. Okay.
If you move a certain amount of cubic feet of earth, you're required to get a sediment permit. And so it's not any trivial job. It's rather large jobs where these are required. So if you're just extending your back deck, you don't have to get it. It doesn't apply to you. But if you move, I think, 100 cubic feet of earth, then you have to do it. So what I would ask my fellow council members right now is what is the additional research that they would like to see to move this forward?
Do you want to have thoughts on that?
All right. So,
if there are none, I would suggest we take a vote on it tonight, if everyone's prepared to do so.
To introduce it?
It's been introduced.
It's been introduced, yes.
All right, it has been introduced, that's right.
It's ready for approval tonight. It's been
and then it would have
up for a sufficient number of days.
Yeah, and
I'm asking Ron to unmute because he has a point here, or a question here.
And it's typical as well to allow a public comment period prior to council vote on adoption. So in addition to the council discussing this ordinance, it would be consistent with past practice to have a public hearing.
Okay, well, we have one more meeting in the fiscal year, and we can ask for public comment to appear to come before the next meeting when we will bring it up for final adoption. Is that appropriate, Ron?
Yeah, or you could have the hearing right now, because I think when the ordinance was introduced, it was stated that the hearing would take place prior to
take place today. I would like to have a formal request for anybody to submit to the council, not on listservs or anything else, but send in your notes, your comments, your letters to council members with your views, pro or con, for or against this ordinance. So let me remind you what it is. It requires anyone, a developer or a sitting resident, homeowner, to either plant a tree or pay a penalty if they don't plant a tree, if there is a movement of earth that requires a sediment control permit. This just makes us consistent with the county requirements. And there have been some people within the village who said that by opting out of that, it gave builders, developers, homeowners a free ride for being in the village compared to being in the county. And so this is an attempt to get rid of that exception. So we're not imposing any steeper requirements that are already being imposed by the county. So I would ask everybody, all 31 participants out there now and anybody else, to send in any comments for, against, or seeking clarification or changes. And we will take that up at the next meeting and put it up for final vote then.
Thanks, Arthur. And I had been on mute there for a second, but I completely subscribe to your approach to give folks that opportunity to comment. So I really appreciate you taking that initiative.
Thank you. Todd, do you have something to say?
No, I was going to agree with postponing it because I don't know that anybody was prepared to vote. So let's give everybody a chance to digest, knowing that it could be up for vote next meeting. So thanks.
Good.
So get more resident input.
Right.
Much better. Okay. So now we have the part of the meeting that everyone has been looking forward to. The election committee will first give a report, and then we'll discuss the possible adoption of the emergency vote counting procedures. So Tiffany, are you on?
Asking to unmute.
Niles, you got
Yep.
me?
Yep,
Yeah.
I got you.
Would you also unmute George as
Certainly.
well? So that
Yep.
can
Okay.
chime in?
Yep.
Okay, well, thanks everybody, Tiffany Cisna and George McAleese, the election committee. I just, starting off with the great news we received this afternoon, Niles had reported from Electech that they have received ballot return envelopes from more than 50% of the qualified voters in Martin's Additions. Very excited to hear that. That would be a higher voter turnout than we have seen since 2015. And to answer one of the questions that came up earlier, those are being received still within the 2 to 3 day time frame. So that is what the vendor has consistently reported throughout a 2 to 3 day time frame for receipts. So to get back to the meat of where we were going for our presentation tonight, just we wanted to thank everybody who participated, the candidates who participated in the candidate forum, the residents who listened in and submitted questions. We want to thank the council for taking a look at the vote counting procedures tonight. As many may know, the election committee met in open session on the 29th to discuss these procedures. While the council didn't approve procedures for last year's all mail-in election, we were advised that the council needed to approve procedures pursuant to the charter's requirement that the committee shall operate according to rules and procedures adopted by the council. So that's why they're coming to you in this way this year. For the most part, not surprisingly, since we're using the same vendor and it's 100% mail-in again, the processes are going to be very similar. We started with the informal procedures used by last year's committee, and then we built on those. Broadly speaking, the process starts with sorting the ballot return envelopes that the vendor receives into conforming stacks and non-conforming stacks. And that means that the vendor checks all of the things that folks had to do on the outside of those envelopes. Is there a signature? Is there a name? Is there a street, house number and a street name? Does all of that information match with the control number that was issued by the vendor? Then the committee will adjudicate any non-conforming ballots. So if there's a concern with one of the ballots, if that information doesn't match and the vendor isn't able to readily say, yep, this is a ballot that we issued, then the committee will go through those and make those decisions on a case-by-case basis, which is required by law. Then the ballot return envelopes and secrecy envelopes are opened and separated. So for those who were questioning, how do I sign this and then have my ballot remain secret? The return envelopes are then sequestered aside, and then the opening of the secrecy envelopes happens. And then all of the ballots are fed into the computer at that time. The committee will review all non-conforming ballots and all ballots with write-in candidates, so the machine can count what is put in. They can see that someone filled in a box that says write-in, but they can't read, the machine doesn't read the name for us. We would go back and read the names of the individuals there. Only at that point, after we've gone through any of the non-conforming ballots, does the vendor report the preliminary numbers from the machine. Both the committee and the vendor will track challenges this year, any decisions or objections, and then all materials are returned to the village. So I think this is one of the questions that came up earlier. Just as it was done last year, all envelopes, all ballots, I think even the vendor's notes came back last year in the envelope. So they don't want to keep any of our stuff. It all comes back to us. And then it is a public record. So if individuals want to review it, since Niles is our designated public record custodian, they would coordinate with him about, scheduling a time or coming to the office, however that is done. Just two differences for this year on how we'll be counting or the recommendations that came to you. And they're significant. One is that we would like to allow a named observer for each candidate to be present for the entire vote count. So from the beginning to the end of the public meeting, that observer would be there for Electech presenting, each of the envelopes that are non-conforming for us to make decisions. And then secondly, that we're not going to certify results until we have received written confirmation from the vendor about their tally and made sure that matches with our tally. So we'll be on a Zoom, and Arthur's question of can more residents, if they desire to log in, yes, we got the vendor to say they weren't concerned about that. So folks who want to join in for the fun can observe. There will be one named observer for each candidate who could raise objections. So they'll be everybody will be on throughout. What the vendor explained to us when we asked for the written confirmation before we were going to issue or certify the results, they said their process before they give any of their clients written information is to go through an internal verification. That in some cases they might recount, in some cases they might do a sample. They're a professional services provider for places much bigger than we are. So they said they would go through their verification or their validation process and then email us their results. We would then have the tally that we had done with everybody on Zoom and say, yes, these match, or no, they don't, before we would certify final results. So in line with the deadline set by election plan, as you guys know, today was the votes would be counted on the 20th. That's the received by deadline. And again, I just want to let people know, votes have been being or ballot envelopes have been being received, continue to be received within 2 to 3 days of the postmark date. So from today, we still have a full week before we get to the 20th, and ballots have been being received 2 to 3 days since that. So we look forward to you guys reviewing this. We're here to answer questions. George, I think if there was another question about if we want to answer things that came up before the council starts their discussion. Ballot receipt time frame, Electech counting undervotes, their work, as Niles, I think, answered that one. And then will we, comply with document retention? I think we went over that all of the documents will come back counted, ballot return envelopes that are deemed conforming, and then those that are not. Everything comes back to the village. So, George, what did I miss?
I think that is everything for on election questions that were raised earlier. Yeah, I think that covered everything. Yeah, just the records retention and all that stuff that's laid out in the election plan and in the contract with the vendor, that they return all the counted ballots, all the ballot return envelopes, and all spoiled ballots to the village for preservation. So yeah, I think we should be that's, I think, answers the question that was raised around those.
And you said the time frame was 2 to 3 days. Is that is 3 days the outside receipt time?
So I'll just say from what I'm.
Right.
Go ahead, Tiffany.
I thank you, Niles, for seeing that I tried to mute myself,
Yeah.
so I didn't mess up George, and I couldn't unmute myself. That is our understanding from Niles and his conversations with the vendor. Yes.
So that's my question too. When you say 2 to 3 days, is that the majority, the bulk, or is that all of it? Are there any ballots coming in 5, 17, 13 days later?
So from what the vendor has said, the vast majority of ones are 2 to 3 days. We had one day where every single one was 2 days. We've obviously that's a little bit different when you're talking about ones coming in over the weekend versus the weekday, because of course the mail is not collected on Sunday. So there's a couple where it's 4 days or something like that, like, you know, over the weekend. But I would say what we are seeing is pretty consistently 2 to 3 days, or what the vendor is telling us is 2 to 3 days.
So we haven't seen any that were 10 days.
No.
Okay. 9, 7. So
Not that we've seen. You know, again, as I said, the vast majority of them have been 2 to 3 days.
okay. So there are no extreme outliers in that.
No, not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay, thank you. That's my question.
And I don't know if Tiffany had mentioned this, but Niles specifically has been communicating with the vendor, I think every day, Niles, right?
Yep.
And providing us with updates about how many ballots are coming in each day, and confirming from them each day that they're continuing to see the ballots are coming back in that 2 to 3 day window. And we've been getting daily updates on that, and the plan is that we will continue to get updates from them kind of every business day between now and the counting deadline.
Great.
Okay, so does anyone have further questions? Any council members? Any discussion?
Laura, I have some questions, and thanks. So there were two, I think, important questions raised earlier by several residents, and I just wanted to know, is this the appropriate time to comment on them? First was the extension of the deadline by 1 week, and also having a recount procedure. I have some thoughts there, but I just want to know if this is the time to provide them or not.
I suppose so, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. So I'll make this relatively short and straightforward, and I appreciated the committee and all their hard work, also the thoughtful note that they had shared. I believe every council member received it because it was sent individually, but it was an email that had been shared with each of the candidates and also in consultation with our attorney around those specific questions. So I just wanted to give my thoughts. In terms of the extension of the deadline, I thought that Larry Watson had given a really cogent argument where there was some wording that had an and or very specifically stated. And I'm thinking of the legal precedent that our attorney, specific to something that came up at the last council meeting around the garage door and the corner property, and how while the intent perhaps was implied, because of the wording, it was ambiguous. So in that particular case, it seemed as if there was some leeway that was given to the vendor or the contractor, and that now we're going forward with correcting that language. And so when I look at this particular question, and I look at applying that same logic, I tend to side with the idea that because there was some it was ambiguous in terms of the and or, quite frankly, I would like to see us extend it by a week, because I would, again, if the implied intent is having that 2 dates, the and, but not the and or, well, we can correct that for next year. But since we did have this ambiguous wording, I see it as a nothing burger to say that you can extend it by a week. That's one. The second, the recount piece, which again, I think residents, I could name names, but I'll refrain from that, have provided some very cogent arguments. And again, in that same note that had been sent to candidates, I think there is an inference that our attorney quoted state law, and that it would be really a litigious event that would make a recount. And I just put on the table, my understanding is that the vendor, Electech, actually has some very standard SOPs around a recount. So it would be actually a nothing burger for us as a council to say, yeah, okay, let's put in a procedure for a recount if one of the candidates or perhaps a resident would like that. So I just want to put on the table that I personally would like to see us extend the deadline by 1 week because of that ambiguous language that, again, if we want to correct it going forward at a future election, so it's very clear, that's great. But I think because there was an error in the language and there was some ambiguity, we should err on the side of more inclusiveness as opposed to less. And then again, in terms of the recount, my understanding is the vendor has a very specific SOP. It's a nothing burger, and rather than having candidates or residents have to go to court, I think we should just adopt a simple recount procedure. So I will turn back over to the chair. Thank you.
So if I might just ask Tiffany and or George, using that great and or language, to describe the recount procedure, SOP, as you understand it.
Electex recount procedures?
Yes, I'm sorry, George, yes. Electec.
Yeah.
Not eclectic, but electec.
I am not aware of Electex recount procedures. Niles, I don't know if that has
Right.
come up in your conversations with them.
So what I will say is that, you know, Electec as a vendor has the ability to recount either, you know, by utilizing the machine, putting them through again, checking their own sources they've done, hand recounts before as well, to also facilitate recounts. I think the question from Electec's perspective, you know, there's the physical thing of what they could do, but there's a question of under what circumstances or what would be the standards for a recount that would be that the village would have to question. So Electec could do the physical work of recounting, if that makes sense. It's more a question of under what circumstances would the village do that and for what.
I think also just from what I understood Matt to explain Electec, that, you know, the initial count, we will all be on Zoom together. We will go through everything, tally, and then when we asked for something, he said, you know, then you can have your number, right? That's the number you'll hear. But when we asked for something in writing, we weren't going to, you know, report something that was kind of a preliminary tally. He said, well, before we, you know, it's our standard practice, before we send things in writing, we go through our internal verification process. And he said, you know, it just depends on what we think is appropriate for that client, that space, you know, our professional conduct kind of process. And so we would count once on Zoom, they would do their verified tally, and then we would receive an email from them saying, here's where we are after we did our internal, you know, verified tally. Then the committee would be looking at, okay, does that tally that we've now received in writing match the count that we just did on Zoom, you know, with everyone else, before there would be any certification of a vote. So it's almost like there's two counts built in this year, just because of their process before they would submit something to us in writing.
Yeah, I'm asking Todd to unmute now.
Thanks. So I'm a little bit unclear as to kind of teeing off of Jeff's question. What are the situations in which we envision needing a recount? Is it a tie vote? Is it questions about the validity of certain ballots being counted or not being read well? I'm not certain what really would trigger that. And then the question is, who's responsible for that? If it's decided.
George, want to go with that one?
Yeah. So As best I have been able to understand it, there is no current provision under the village charter or the village election plans that provide for mandating a recount. And under, I think we consulted with Ron advised us that is something that is traditionally in Maryland handled in the judicial system of you can seek a judicial remedy for this. It's not, electech procedures, I think, are just purely the technical of this is how we count the votes, how we check our thing, and then this is what would be available to us. There would have to be an entirely new structure developed and approved. I would imagine by the council. I think Ron could probably check me on that because I don't think that would be something that would be the election committee, as best I understand it, does not have authority under the council to create a new recount procedure, but you would have to create a new procedure that would outline under what circumstances a recount will happen automatically, under what circumstances the recount can be requested by one of the candidates, how that's being paid for, because I can speak to recounts that I have participated in New York State, in which under a certain margin of kind of the final tally, it is an automatic, it is paid for by the state. Over a certain margin, it has to be paid for by the candidate involved. I don't know the details of how the financing for that would work as to what would be included in the original contract with Electech, if it is. And then the other one is the procedures. Is it, do we run the ballots just through the machine again? And does that line up to that? Is a recount something that you're going to, that a request is made where each ballot must be counted by hand? And if you're doing that, then there's a bunch of procedures that would have to be developed and set out that are very explicit and very clear around how everything is handled during a potential recount, how, you know, chain of custody on the ballots, who is looking at them, and then you get into what I think goes all the way back to 2000 in terms of the very clear things around what, you know, is this ballot box completely full? If there's a stray mark, what do you handle with the stray mark? And you would wind up needing people who can set out what exactly all those specific rules are going to cover. And then you're going to need an entirely separate set of people who are going to monitor and adjudicate any of the decisions on that, along with inevitably some kind of both tracking system and system for verifying those decisions. So I think the Electech ones are just their pure technical ones. And then if we were creating a formal recount procedure, that is something that would have a lot of elements that would have to be stood up.
Asking him to unmute, so.
Okay, yeah, I think the word recount here is being used in an ambiguous manner. In the past, after, from my understanding, I haven't actually sat in on the counting, but when there has been a very close election, the election committee counted the ballots a second time and even a third time. Is that a recount? Is that what you're talking about? Or is it something after the fact where a week later, a request has come in to count the ballots again? And this is where all the procedures that George mentions would come into play. I would suspect, not having done this and not being sitting on the committee, that if Electech runs the ballots, you look at all the challenge one and it comes out to be a dead tie, you're going to say to Electech, can you run those through the machine again? That would be my natural reaction to do it and see what comes out. And you run through the whole thing again. I wouldn't call that a recount. Maybe it is. So I think we have to clarify what it is we're talking about. Counting again at the time and in the presence of that evening, going through machines, or something after the event where there are still questions about what the final conclusions are. So I would like those people who are talking about recounts to clarify what it is they mean and whether it's possible and feasible and even likely in terms of a possibility of a close vote to simply ask Electech, run them through the machines again and see what we come up with the second time. And there was where the election committee will have to decide.
Arthur, can I ask a question on that front? If the council is seeking clarification, then also, you know, if if we're doing this count on Zoom and they're running everything through the machine once, and we get a number from that, and then they say, okay, our internal verification process is to run them again, or whatever they deem as appropriate, right? Is that, I mean, that's twice through the machines. If they come out with the same number at the end, does that constitute a recount? I don't know. And Todd, just, I will say one of your things comes off the table. If it's a tie, the charter says we hold a runoff election within 2 weeks of the original election. So there's one thing that we can answer right now. So.
I'm asking you to unmute. I'm asking you to hang on.
Hey Niles, Arthur's waving.
Yep, I know. I'm trying to get you. I'm asking you to unmute. Is it? You have to. There we go.
Got it. Okay, got it. Yeah, the question is here: when is the election done? If you run two runs through, and suppose it comes out one vote different, can you say let's run it again? At that point, I don't think we have a tie. You're still counting. You haven't reported anything yet, and the charter or the ordinances don't come into play. It's only after you report a final conclusion that would happen. So I'm saying that there is a certain flexibility within the counting procedures to count once, to count twice, to count 3 times until you come up with the same number and you're pretty sure what the results are. Then after that is when I would think the questions that Andrews or other questions about recount come up. But within the counting procedures, I would think that you would keep doing it until you get the same answer 3 times.
Okay.
Or maybe twice. It's up to you.
Arthur, I think you, as always, lay out again a very thoughtful, cogent analysis. I think the only thing I'd layer on top of this is I think we'd all be amiss if we didn't recognize the number of comments that have come out about some questions around voter roll and just a lot of things that when you have an election with 6 candidates and you have votes split between 6, it could become a very close election. So I think when it's very clear cut, it could be a dozen, it could be, is 10 clear cut, is 50 clear cut. But if it comes down to a couple votes here and there between candidates, I think that's where just, being a bit thoughtful, because obviously a lot of energy has gone into this. We have council members who put a lot of energy into campaigning for folks, and we know that this is a highly contested election. So again, I put it out there. I think we could probably talk about this for 3 weeks straight. I'm just saying, if there's a way for us to come up with something that is straightforward, as opposed to someone having to go to a court to force something, I think that we're reasonable people. We're a small community. We could probably come up with something that folks would agree on. So, and the same, but it's my same philosophy for extending it by a week. I feel that there are a lot of reasons we can come up with to say we won't do this, we won't do that. But again, it's my opinion. I'm only one vote, but I feel we should extend the deadline, and I think we could probably handle in a discussion of an hour or 2 with the vendor. We could probably come up with a recount procedure that all the candidates and perhaps many residents would agree with. So, but I'll end there. I promise I'll put myself on self-imposed mute going forward.
Does anyone have additional comments, council members? Comments, questions?
Okay.
Well, at this time, we can vote on the
yeah, we have. Sorry.
On the emergency vote counting procedures, right?
Hang on, I am.
So, do we have a Niles?
Sorry, it's just Arthur. Were you?
Yeah.
Sorry?
I saw a few hands up of people, non-council members who wanted to comment. Andrew and I think Marty. Oh, and Kathy. Katie. Sorry, Katie.
So, do we want to just go? I'll start with Andrew, I think.
Yeah. And hopefully, please try to keep it relatively brief. Because we're already way behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'll make it real quick, Susan. Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you.
To me, and others that may have a different response, what Arthur just explained makes total sense, and that's where I was coming from. Just to have an awareness of what the process encompasses. Is it counting them twice through the machines or 3 times just to be sure? And is there a trigger, I mean, with 6 candidates and 2 slots, is there a trigger like there are triggers in states, whether it's 0.5 or 1%, that would maybe go to hand tabulation? Something like that. I think if not for this time, which I hope we can still do, we should really think about for the future, since we've had votes within, wins within 1 vote. So I think that would be great. And then again, extending a week, 2 or 3 or 4 days just for that outlier that might take more than 2 to 3 days is no skin off your nose. I think it's such an easy thing to do. There's no rule that would stand against that. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
All right. And then I think Marty.
Yes,
Yep.
thank you. On the May 27th date, I think that there may well be a couple of outliers, and as everyone said, this is likely to be a very close election. I think it makes really good sense electorally as a procedure to extend the date to May 27th. I strongly urge you to do that. I also would like to know, if you want to stay with the May 20th date, if the election committee will make a public commitment right now to check the postal tracking system at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. on May 20th and see if any ballots are still en route, because we do have postal tracking this year. Thank you for doing that. And if even 3 or 2 or 1 ballot is still en route, I say that is compelling that all votes should be counted. That's the basic principle of election law. And that would then have the committee move it to the 27th. I think it really is imperative to check the postal tracking at 6 p.m. on May 20th and see if something is still en route. Will the committee agree to do that?
And then, sorry.
And I'll come back to the recount in a minute. But go ahead, answer that, please. Thank you.
Okay. Katie has her hand up.
All right, let's just do this.
And so does Larry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're popping up all over.
Mm-hmm. I'm asking you to unmute. Okay, good.
Okay. We're popping up because we care so much. We've put a lot of time and energy. I see 4 out of 6 candidates on this call. I don't see the council's golden boys on it. But anyway, I just want to thank Jeffrey Blander for addressing and acknowledging the extension that the candidates have been asking for. And in the case of a possible squeaker, like 6 candidates for 2 spots. So say after the top candidate, the 2 and 3 are tied. So do you just have the runoff or just those candidates? I mean, could you explain that a little bit more? That could very well happen.
All right. And then I think Larry wanted to add his question as well.
Larry, did you want to talk?
Yeah.
Arthur, thank you for your, and Katie, I agree with your points very much. Arthur, thank you for hitting it right on the head. Arthur asked a question which actually was not answered. We've had votes here in the village that have been 4 votes have made the difference. So saying that by and large, the bulk of the things coming in 2 or 3 days, is actually a non-answer and non-information. Arthur asked, what's the longest that a ballot has taken to come in? And I didn't hear an answer to that. So I'd like to know what that is, because that's more of a relevant fact here. The next question I have is, what actually is a tie? Arthur brought up another example. What if it's 1 vote? Is that a tie? And how are you going to handle that? I'm done. Thank you.
So if I could chime in for a second on that. The issue is not the ballots that can be run through the machine automatically. The machine will count them the same way each time. The issue is the ballots that are non-conforming, that are subject to review by the election committee. And those non-conforming ballots there may be 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 of them. And so I think that any recount, any like notion of what's a tie would really probably rise and fall on the ballots that were adjudicated by the election committee rather than just running a machine count 2 or 3 times. It's going to look at, I think that any recount, in the sense we're talking about it here, would really turn on the non-conforming ballots. And one of the suggestions I think might be helpful here is that after Electech does its verification run, and the committee then looks at their numbers versus the final numbers in writing from Electech, that they have an open meeting on that, so that that is public as well. And not do that behind closed doors in a closed session, because the notion of a close election or a tie may well, in fact probably will, come down to those non-conforming ballots that the election committee must make a decision about. I think those decisions should be made in an open meeting, and I strongly urge the committee to do that.
All right.
Is just to be clear, is that how you dealt with it, Marty?
Last year, yes, we did all the adjudicated ballots, the ones that didn't, the ones the machine kicked out. We did all of that publicly.
In previous years too?
Yes. Well, previous years, we could have had observers. We didn't have any because nobody wanted to be an observer. But previous years, we did a manual count, and we also did, as Arthur pointed out, if it was close, we recounted everything manually, second or third time to make sure our numbers were right. We also counted all the votes not cast, the ones left blank, to make sure that our totals tallied. That's why 100% vote reporting is so important, because it gives you a cross check. And so, yeah, we were very, very meticulous about how we did that. And
so when you say if it was close, what would be the delta? What would be the difference between the 2 closest vote getters? Like, what would you say if it's close? You just automatically do it.
Yeah, we did it if it was within three or four votes. We did a recount. Yeah.
4. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, it didn't come down to the ones that were clean and simple ballots. It came down to the ones that were some way questionable, where you had to make a judgment call as to the rule is that if the election officials can reasonably ascertain the intent of the voter, you count the vote. And it's those judgment call ballots that are the ones that would make or break a tie. And so you need to really have that, I think, in an open committee meeting, so that the candidates are satisfied that things were done well and appropriately and all that. I think we need to build confidence here in this election.
Well, I think the confidence in the election has been undermined, and I'm not sure why, because essentially it is following last year's procedures. But I agree with you that there has been a very concerted effort to undermine confidence. And I do think we want to do whatever we can to restore that. There's really no reason why we shouldn't have confidence in it. And speaking of last year, please correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the time between the postmark date and the counting a week last year?
Yes, and I did object to it last year. I thought it should be 2 weeks last year.
Okay, so that'll be on the record. Okay, thank you.
All right. There are 2 others who had questions. I think John Sharrow had one, and then one other. I'm asking John to unmute right now.
Before we go to John, can we answer my question about will the committee check the postal tracking records on May 20th before proceeding with the count to see if any ballots are still in transit? That question hasn't been answered yet. Will you check the postal tracking and see?
So, Tiffany or George, do you want to address that, or I can address it? I mean, as I've said before, we've been communicating directly every day with Electech, so I think any questions of what's outstanding and is something that we can take a look at and have discussion and in coordination with Electech, be able to share that information with the committee and then sort of go forward that way. That's what I would think.
Well, I know you can do that, and I appreciate the fact that you're doing that with Electech now, keeping bird dogging it now in the process.
Yeah.
My question is about May 20th. Suppose on May 20th the postal tracking says there are 5 ballots still
Mhm.
en route. Will the committee delay the count until those 5 ballots are received? Because that's 10 votes. That's enough to change an election outcome.
Well, I mean, I think this starts to be a legal question we can ask Ron. What happens if there are? And when does a deadline by which we have to count become a practical matter? You know, there may be one envelope that's in transit that, you know, ended up wherever, envelopes end up in the postal system when they don't get delivered. What does that mean? Is, I guess, from a purely we're executing as a committee, we're having to execute question. I would say, does that then mean that the 20th is not the deadline? And so I think that's I pose that for the council as a practical question. We have to have a time in which we can count. And I just, we have to set a date and time for that. If we push it back after the 20th, then does that mean that we're accepting ballots after the 20th? Or when is the actual last time Electech's going to go and pick up ballots from the box? As we mentioned earlier, we've got more than a 50% voter participation rate today, and we have a whole nother week before ballots come in. And I think this is one of the things that last year's election committee wisely said, it's election day, but we need to allow time for ballots to trickle in. And so a week was that set time for ballots to trickle in. So we followed that mold for this year. Today is election day, postmarked by day. There's a whole nother week for ballots to trickle in. And that's why the deadline was set on the 20th. So I offer that to the council as a practical question that goes along with this.
Thanks, Tiffany. This is Jeff. I'm going to jump in, and I apologize. I know because I have that drop dead, so I'm juggling. But I just want to comment real quickly, and I appreciate. I'm one vote, but I say here and now that we extend by a week. I think from someone who works in the biggest bureaucracy probably on the planet, there's always a way to approach something. Why there are many reasons not to do something. But I believe, especially in the context of just this past year, the amount of energy and engagement by the community to ensure every vote is counted, I see there's no reason for us to extend by 1 week. And we can do it as a council. We can take a vote on it tonight, and we can work through the administration to say, the 27th is when we're going to count the votes. But for a practical matter, I also, and this is the last comment I'll say, I really like what Marty is suggesting is, why don't we use our technology? Are there going to be any ballots still in transit? Why don't we use technology and data to drive our decision making? But with that said, extend it by a week. I mean, it'll just make I think a lot of folks feel comfortable, and there really, I don't think is any good reason for us not to. And I'll turn over. So I vote yes.
Well, just on that point, I think picking up on what Tiffany was alluding to, suppose we extend it a week, and a week later, the post office says there's one vote in transit in post office land. Do we then extend it another week?
We'll make that decision now. I'll say no. We'll give it 1 week is our hard stop, and then we can't please everybody. And that, Arthur, better than anyone who served on the committee. You do one thing and you're going to have a bunch of people running after you, after your tail. So I would say, look, as a compromise, extend by 1 week. Anything that comes in after, we compromise. And also, I want to just put on the table, and then I'll pause. I apologize if I'm taking up too much time, is I think we do have to recognize the good point that Larry Watson pointed out was the and/or. It's not just this emotional, we have to do an extra week. I mean, there was some ambiguity there that let's give the benefit of the doubt. And I think 1 week is not indefinite. I think we could do it. But again, I won't keep talking. My view, and I'll let other council members vote on their conscience on it. Thanks.
I think just to go back to something for a second, John Sharrow, I think, is now unmuted. So
My question is pretty simple. It may have been answered. Is there a list of all the BMA residents that have voted, or
right. So
there is a list?
So the vendor has the list of people. They're the ones receiving the ballots. So they are every day when they're going through and doing it, checking off whose ballots they've received and so forth. So they.
Okay, so if I want to know if my ballot has been counted, then they're able to tell me that information.
Yes,
correct?
and if that's what you want, you can say that now. I'll deal with that tomorrow. How's that sound?
Right. Well, the question is that suppose if mine got lost in the mail, and here again it's possible, or whatever. Okay, but you answered my question. I wasn't sure that there was going to be a list generated. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
That was.
Sorry, I thought you were done.
Okay.
Oh.
So, do we have any further discussion?
Oh yeah. So I think Larry had a comment and Susan had a comment.
Yeah, I think John put his finger on it, and so did Marty. So let's say that you give it the week, and then Arthur said, "Well, what happens if the ballot's still out after the week? We're still waiting." Okay. Well, don't ask me to do the math on this or figure the formula, but wouldn't it matter what the status was at that point of the number of votes? Let's say there were 4 ballots out and the margin of voting was 25 people difference. It wouldn't matter at that point about those other votes coming in. You could make that decision based upon how close or tight the election is.
But then we would have had to have counted the votes.
Well, you mean you won't do them at all?
Yeah,
Not until after
you could take a preliminary. You could take a preliminary vote. See what's going on. Ron Bolt's shaking his head, so maybe that can't be done.
No.
I'm asking Ron to unmute so that we can get to that point.
Yeah, I mean it's a good idea in theory, but Larry, what happens if one candidate has a lead, and then of course the candidates that are behind would assert a different position? They producing a count midway through could prejudice the decision making on whether the deadline is extended.
They do that all the time. We see it on television all the time.
Well, and there's also a risk that certain items may never be received. So
well,
I think
again,
picking a receipt deadline is
yes, but if I have, let's say, it finally gets down to 4 ballots, okay, that's 8 votes, then and it's already been decided by a margin of 15 votes. They don't matter at that point. That's a clear decision point.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, that's my
idea. So I think I saw Susan first before Andrew, and then we can go from there. I'm asking you to unmute Susan. There we
go. I was just going to say, I think it was asked why might there be a lack of confidence or a questioning of the voting this year, and I think well, just for me, I don't really know about all the previous years, but I know when we voted in person, you didn't have to. I don't think you had to write your name, sign your name, put the date, put your address, put the street number, put the name of the street, and it seems to me the issue is the discretionary element that goes into reading whether or not a ballot will be counted based on the envelope and what's on the outside. And when I've asked a very explicit, specific question about, are you going to count a ballot like that doesn't have, or say it's not valid and shouldn't be counted if it doesn't have the address or the street number or the date, I haven't gotten an answer. And so that's one reason that it makes you wonder, like, well, there's this discretionary element. So if the principle were that you can reasonably ascertain the intent of the voter, and this is just me, I would say if somebody returned a ballot in little old Martin's Editions and they bothered to send that in and it's got a control number on it anyway, and the control number like correlates to an address in our village, you know, I would say just, I think they intended to vote, like, I would count it. I would never like dispute it. I mean, personally, that's just me. But, you know, even if there was just a signature and you couldn't really tell, well, that wasn't a very good signature, you know, I think the intent is they returned it and it's kind of got the control number that relates to our village and it, so I just would, like, I'd count it, but I had the sense from the answers I've gotten or the lack of specificity around the answers that someone could use a discretionary element to say, I'm not going to count certain votes that don't have the date or that don't have the name, but they had the signature, but the signature was messy. You know, so I don't really know what goes into deciding if that envelope is okay. And because of that, I think there's just discretion. And so it makes you go, gee, well, there could be discretion about the number of ballot, you know, it just, that's the concern. I think if you could have a more, like a basic principle, we're gonna count everything that comes in because there's a control number on it, period, then, you know, because in previous elections, every ballot was counted. So that makes me more confident when I know every ballot was counted. But this time, if I don't know, you know, certain ones aren't counted, or I haven't been given the number of ones that weren't counted and what was the reason for them, then that creates it. But, you know, maybe if you give that, well, that, you know, that would help create confidence. Thanks.
All right. And then Andrew, I think.
Thanks, Miles. Just real quickly on not my original comment, but in Susan's words, in little old Martin's Editions, common sense should apply as it relates to voter intent. I mean, it really, we shouldn't go out of our way to make it difficult to vote here. And with that control number and all that, I totally agree. On the same front here, with making it easy for voters to vote, I'm not suggesting even what Larry is saying in terms of what if there's one more that might be showing up in the next day or two, can we extend it? Why don't we just have a hard deadline? People send in ballots, mail-in ballots too late in federal elections, their vote doesn't get counted because they sent it too late. Here in Martin's Editions, we have the power, and nothing is standing in our way based on the charter, to say, come on, let's give it a little buffer, and that buffer is the final deadline, period. So whether it's a one vote margin and there's, you know, it's May 27th and there's still 2 ballots outstanding, well, then it's too late. But why don't we give us that kind of buffer just to protect ourselves, just to make sure that every vote is counted? It's so simple, and it will protect every voter in this village. Thank you.
I agree completely with you, Andrew. Thank you for saying it so clearly.
Okay, does anyone else have a comment?
So I'll just add on, probably a little bit contrarian here, is that, you know, and I appreciate what Jeff was saying about ambiguity, but I think that the committee's been very good, and the village has been very good about publicizing like crazy about the dates, the mail-in, here's the date that you have to postmark. I think we were also good as a village of saying, you know, just in case there's not a postmark, we'll forget about the postmark if need be, but we'll accept ballots that come in up until the 20th. So I feel like there's been a tremendous amount of notice. I feel like we've relaxed the postmark date, and I feel like at some point you got to say we stick with what we got. So that's kind of where I'm.
This is Jeff.
I'm just not. Just one sec, Jeff. Thanks. Yeah. So I'm just not convinced of the extra week. I then think, well, if we say we have one hard deadline, and then we say, well, as you were saying, Andrew, well, let's make the 27th a hard deadline. Why doesn't somebody else come in and say, well, maybe we ought to make a date a week after that date a hard deadline? So I'm just struggling with this.
And Todd, I'm going to rebut very quickly on this, which is, again, this is not an emotional plea. I know that it sounds like it, but let's not forget the and or. And I think Larry had made a very cogent analysis, which is and or implies, again, we're focusing on all the ballots that were submitted with the postmark by the 13th, right? So if there were no ambiguity, if it said 13th and 20th, there wouldn't be an issue here. But because there was language that posted and or, that, again, my opinion is, benefit of the doubt for this year, we extend it by a week. And then next year, for next election, we can clear up that language so there's no ambiguity. So even though there's been a lot of correspondence, we really can't get away from the fact that we had the and or that created this opening. And again, it's something that is perhaps subjective, but as far as I see it, the intent and or could say that we meant that if you had it postmarked, your vote would be counted.
Niles, has everybody who wanted to speak spoken at this point?
Yes, everyone who had, yes. Mm-hmm.
In that case, I would suggest that we actually move to a vote because I think we're starting to go in circles here.
Okay. So would someone like to make a motion?
I would like to make a motion to proceed with the vote on the extension or not extending the deadline.
How would you like to frame it?
I move that we vote on, let's just say extending the deadline for an extra week for receiving votes until May 27th.
George.
Sorry, I had a really quick question relating to that, because there's actually two different approaches relating to extension, and just since as the election committee we're going to have to incorporate these. Is it extending the received by deadline to May 27th, or is it changing in the vote counting procedures the counting date, which would keep in place the previous deadlines that says which would basically make it so any ballot that comes in after the 20th would have to have been postmarked prior to the 13th. Because if you move it to the 27th, then you would get into an issue where if somebody had postmarked the ballot on the 17th, but it arrives on the 22nd, now does that have to be counted? And so I'm just asking for, is the extension changing the counting date or changing the received by deadline?
So I feel like I misspoke because by moving to extend, I guess that says that I'm voting for it. So I will move not to extend anything because I feel like there's been plenty of time to submit the votes. It's consistent with prior years. There's been many reminders, and we don't have any proof that it's taken longer than 2 or 3 days to receive any of the ballots. And therefore, I believe that we've had sufficient time to cast our ballots, and our vendor who's conducting the counting has been very involved in letting us know that the ballots are arriving as we anticipated. So I am, again, to clarify myself, I'm moving not to extend the deadlines any further to avoid slippery slope of opening all of these issues that we actually discussed in the last 40 minutes.
Okay. So do we have a second? Second? Arthur?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I will vote. My explicit questions about extended receipt times was meant to satisfy myself that by not extending the deadline, we weren't cutting people off. And the evidence seems to support, I would have gone along if I were told that there were votes coming or mail coming in 7 days, 8 days, 10 days later after being mailed, I would say extend. But since we do not have that evidence, it has been coming in much shorter times, I vote not to extend the deadline.
Okay. So all in favor?
I vote.
No.
As you know, I vote for the extension. And just to answer George's question, I would have focused on the idea, remember the and/or, the language, so we're not trying to create new territory here, but it would focus on all ballots that were cast by the 13th with the postmark, and then giving those the extra buffer as has been stated. And Arthur, I appreciate your comment, but I think we have too little data right now to really understand. And again, knowing this could come down to a few votes, I believe the buffer, but I appreciate everyone has their right of how they want to vote. Thank you.
Okay, I think we move on now to accepting the whole procedure package.
Yes, we do. So does someone want to make a motion to accept the vote counting procedures?
I will so move.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
So opposed. Jeff, are you voting?
I'm asking him to unmute right now to see. All right, let's just.
We may have lost it.
It was supposed to do a hard stop soon, if not earlier, so you might have had to sign off. Okay.
Okay, so we have a vote of 4 yes and
4
1
yes and 1 unsure.
not voting.
So next, I guess we're ready to move on to
Okay, moving on.
a brief discussion of listserv options.
Oh, right. Yeah. We have been receiving a lot of discussion about whether Martin's Edition should have its own listserv, should set up one, a new private one. I've done a survey of about 8 of our local neighboring municipalities to see what they do, and they're all over the map. I just found out today that Somerset, which had set up its own listserv within the confines of the town, is now letting that run down, and they're going to kill that, and are now looking to set up a private one or provide for information through their website. They're still working on that. As I see it, we have several different models out there. The town of Chevy Chase has the most extensive hands-on monitoring, where the monitors go over every message and will suggest edits to the poster to change it to conform with the rules that are out there. Most of the others simply have a monitor who resubmits the messages on a go, no-go basis. There are towns that have extensive rules about what's permitted, others that have virtually no rules. Some encourage political discussion, including local elections. Some prohibit all all political discussions. Some prohibit all commercial activities. Others allow and encourage commercial activities for individuals selling their own, the bureau that they're going to put out on the stoop when they move. So they're all over the place. So I would say if we were going to go forward to it, it's up to us to make up the rules, how we would proceed, what kind of monitoring, what kind of volunteers we would have. These are all run on a volunteer basis. None hires anybody. These are all resident volunteers who do it. So I would suggest going forward that we start asking for some volunteers who want to discuss this, perhaps setting up a committee, although I don't want to get another formal committee going, but at least some informal discussions of how to move forward on this. I think we need a new listserv that is open to the entire community, but that also has some modicum of monitoring on it, so that certain kinds of behavior is prohibited. So I would like some guidance on going forward, perhaps asking all our residents to provide suggestions, and perhaps after the election to have another town hall meeting where people can contribute their views in large number of people doing so. And before that, send in your ideas. We want to hear about that. But I'm open to the other council members for their input on this.
Arthur, I think it's a great idea. We've talked about a village managed listserv for years, and we just kind of ran into roadblocks in our own heads trying to think it through and what the implications to the costs are and management of it, and just all of those things. But I think it would be helpful to unite the community and to have a forum where everybody could post and not be blocked as some of the residents in the village are. Maybe it's something that we could, and I'm just throwing it out there, if you disagree, obviously speak up, but under the Community Engagement Committee, so we wouldn't have to set up a committee of its own.
Good idea.
Just something to think about.
Right, good. One, Ron, you can help me on this. Somerset may be withdrawing from their own management because of the problem of censoring public speech. If you're going to have a moderator, the moderator is going to say certain things cannot be put out there, which then gets in the way of a public organization telling individuals they cannot say certain things. Whereas if it's a private one, you can post your rules and abide by those rules. Ron, is that the problem, the issue?
Yep. I am asking him to unmute.
Arthur, I'm not aware of the reasons why Somerset is discontinuing its listserv. That's news to me. I hadn't heard that. They had a private one, and then they also had one that was moderated by the mayor. So I assume you're referring to the one.
Yeah, that's the one. I just found out today that they are letting that die.
Yeah, no, I apologize. I don't know the reasons why.
Okay, well, one of the reasons that was alluded to is the a public organization censoring or curtailing private speech, and that was felt to be unsuitable.
Okay.
There's one other issue that
So,
arises.
I can answer that. Once the government creates a public forum, then that public forum has to be open for free speech.
Right.
And so I guess what you're alluding to is sometimes it can be hard to draw the line between free speech and something that the moderator may feel is inappropriate.
Right. Okay, there's one other issue that comes up, and that has to do with the council members or manager contributing to a private listserv. And Ron, you brought this up from the Open Meetings Act, and I've gone through the last 2 or 3 years decisions from the Open Meetings Commission, and what they say is this, and you've repeated this, Ron, this isn't new. They say anything that can develop into a conversation by a quorum of members should be avoided. So they say, don't send anything in. And this is equivalent to saying, it's dangerous to drive, so don't drive at all. My position is, if you want to drive, put on a seatbelt and don't go over the speed limit. So it is okay for an individual council member to send in a message to a private listserv. They just have to be careful that it does not develop into what they call a conversation among a quorum. So I think we can do that. In some of the local communities, the council members are very strong about never contributing anything, even though they read every message and look at that as something that is coming from the community. On the other hand, others do contribute with this notion in mind that you're careful about what it is that you're saying, and you don't engage in public decision making. So these are some of the things to think about as we go forward. And Katya, I like your idea. I think the Public Engagement Committee to take this on. And plus with everybody else, we want to get the feedback of moving forward on this. Now, it would not be run by the village. What I would see is a private one, but with encouragement and help. And most of the other communities have a link on their website, but with a warning. And this is interesting. This gives you that arm's length. They say you may be interested in joining this neighborhood listserv, which is not an official part of our town or village. So that's a nice way of providing some arm's length to the activity. So that's all I have on that.
Okay, so now we're ready for the financial report.
Okay, here we go again. For the financial report this month, I departed from our usual procedure. Now, the charter requires that by May 15th, we provide a budget that we did 2 months ago. It's been open for public review. And today we have our final public input on the budget, if anyone wants to say anything about it. It's been very conservative. It's essentially doing what we did last year with some minor changes. The stance that we've taken in the past 10 years has been one of frugality. And this is after our budget completely collapsed in 2010 during the Great Recession. After that, we had to raise our property tax, cut back expenditures, look very carefully at everything we did. And we've been operating that way for the past 10 years. In the meantime, the economy has gotten stronger, the stock market has boomed, our revenues have been coming in, and we've been slowly expanding some of our activities. But we are now running a healthy surplus, which we have been putting in the bank, just for that time in the future when our revenues collapse again. But we are getting considerable comments and suggestions from residents to expand services in a number of different directions. Extending compost collection to the entire community, hiring more police patrols. We have an ordinance on the book that prohibits giving to charities. We could relax that. There are a whole number of ways. Also, the walkability, John Sharrow raised the question before. What are we doing about that? In our RFP for the highways, roads that Niles will talk about, we are considering that. So there are plenty of opportunities to expand spending on services. We've also had a recent suggestion from some residents that we offer a rebate on the excess that we have taken in over the years. Section 5 does that, and they've done that for years. There's been questions about it, although their counsel seems not to have prevailed on them not to do it. But that is another model, is to give money back to the residents through the property tax. So again, the budget that we have proposed is very conservative. It's very similar to last year's, but we are looking for more information from residents about what they would like to see in the future. And the annual survey is a perfect place to do that. Everybody gets a chance to fill in the survey. That is a chance to tell us what you want to see. More services, you want us to give you back your money, or what do you want? Sometimes listservs will highlight one or two very active members of the community at the expense of many others who aren't as vociferous, don't as participate as actively. So I would say use the survey this year particularly to let us know what it is that you would like to see going forward and what we spend our money on. And that's all. Oh, so now we have to ask, are there any other comments on the budget? And if there are not, we can proceed to adopt it and the property tax rates for the coming year.
Okay. Any questions, council members? Okay.
I think you did a good job with the budget, Arthur, and really good, you covered it well, the issues. So
great explanation.
Kudos to you. Thank you.
Of where the money comes from and where it goes. Well done. Okay, so all in favor of approving?
First, it's the tax rates, right?
Sorry,
Ron. First, it's the tax rates. So the tax rates aren't changing.
Oh,
the chicken and the egg question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Either way is fine. Really.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was just following the agenda.
Yeah.
So
Which
let's do the tax rate if that's the.
Yeah.
Okay, all in favor of adopting the tax rate resolution?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? I think we're down to 4 members a supermajority. So all in favor of adopting the 2022 budget ordinance as proposed?
Aye.
All right.
Okay, so it carries. Okay, and now Niles, you're on.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different things. There's several different things going on in the village. Obviously, we've been supporting things like the public safety task force, the election committee, and the community engagement committee who had their meeting last month. Also for the election, we're talking about the mail processing and all of that I've been keeping up with on the election, and then also reviewing the voter roll, both in terms of when we started and as people have made requests, and also just reviewing the voter roll in response to questions about accuracy. In the process of doing this, we looked at and reviewed it. I reviewed it to county records and village records to ensure the accuracy of the voter roll. There is some things related to Constant Contact, our database of sort of out-of-date information, some people's old emails, things like that. So post-election, one of the priorities of the office is going to look more at the Constant Contact data and sort of fix it up. Also, so the next is talking about the walkability report. So I and Doug Lohmeyer and Joe Kutro, who's our traffic engineer, have been looking thoroughly at the walkability report. And one of the first things that Joe and I talked about today, was sort of the first phase is already doing something that the village has been doing sort of sporadically, but making it a more concerted effort, which is to update the signage in the village. Some of it doesn't meet to current standards, and so we're going to be replacing those that need to meet current standards. We're going to be adding ones where we need them, and sort of following on with what the walkability report talked about there. There's also some general comments about sort of larger parts of the process, adding speed bumps and things like that to various streets, which was one of the walkability report's recommendations. Joe had some specific thoughts about how and where to do that, and so he's in the process of providing a more detailed analysis of those type of things, if that's the direction that we want to go going forward, and so he's providing more of that. So the process right now is building up to doing some of the things that we can do right away, and projecting a sort of task for how are we going to address these things upcoming. On the I know the big questions was about the American Rescue Plan funds. I'll show you. Here is the 151 pages of guidance that the Treasury Department gave on the American Rescue Plan. Now we're going to receive the funds. We've already done the paperwork for receiving the funds. The question really becomes some of the uses and how the uses work. There's some specific guidance that will follow on what can and can't be used for, and then how we account for it and things like that. And so there will definitely be an amendment to the budget at some point around that, because the Treasury Department is going to give more specific guidance on what we're supposed to do once we get it, and just make that clear. Lastly, on RFPs. So Arthur talked about the street maintenance one. This one is one of the ones that is about to go out. It hasn't been published yet, just because to follow up on what Arthur was saying. One proposal that I had for the council, and getting the council's thoughts on this right now, is to include in that bid the walkability report, specifically to try to get information from potential bidders around what the costs related to walkability improvements, like speed bumps, like other things, so that we can get a sense in a competitive marketplace of what costs will be, and so that we can make those changes both in the long term and with a sense of what the market bears. And then the waste and recycling bid is out now. I've gotten a couple of questions about that. I'm working on getting those answers, and hopefully we'll get some bids in. The deadline for that is May 21st, so we're trucking along on that. Lastly, I just want to mention one thing, a small thing, but a kind of bizarre thing. stop sign at the corner of Quincy and Oxford got hit and knocked down, and somebody from the village of Chevy Chase reported it to the county, and the county took our sign. So the county currently has our stop sign. They're going to drop it off at the office tomorrow. It's going to be reinstalled tomorrow. So I just wanted to address that because sometimes you won't believe the stuff that happens when people take your signs. Okay.
Now,
Yes.
a quick question on the
Yeah.
federal funds.
Yes.
As you went through carefully those
Yeah.
150 pages,
Mhm.
is there anything in there that we can do
So
according to their guidelines?
so it depends on, so one thing that I know is talked about is improving infrastructure in terms of resilience towards big weather events, right? So looking at our resources and sort of looking at if there's areas to improve roadways, as we're doing things like the walkability study, making sure that we're making those improvements sustainably. That's a good example of something that we could use the funds for.
Okay,
So that's the main area that I saw. There's some other things related to economic impact and things like that that get a little bit more murky given our current status.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. As I looked at the first guidelines,
Yeah.
when that first came out weeks or months ago, it didn't seem as if we fit in any of the categories that they had. But more detail, I know, is
Yes.
now coming through.
And yeah, the main thing, as I said, is this idea of making sort of resilient infrastructure. So I think some improvements that we do could be used, the funds could be used for as we make improvements to make it more resilient.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One quick thing, Niles, on the RFP for the street maintenance.
Yes.
Please make sure that you ask about curb extensions or
Yeah.
vulnerability.
Yeah. So my thought process was to present sort of the findings of the walkability report as part of what the bid package that the bidders are seeing, so that they can think, well, they're looking at this, so we'll provide costs or labor on those specific improvements, so that we're not just getting a general look, but we're also trying to get those specific costs idea.
Right. Yeah, and
All
I
right.
see Lori has popped up. I wanted to thank her for sending around pictures of some of these things from neighboring jurisdictions. They're helpful, and I think if we do it, it'll really improve certainly the visibility of Martin's Addition.
Yeah. All right.
The walkability as well.
Right.
All right. So that concludes my report of just to circle back on the maintenance thing. So if everybody's okay with what I sent around to the council about the RFP, as I said, I'll attach the report and I can clarify the language. But if the council is good with that, I will send that out tomorrow.
That's good.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so we have another opportunity for resident comments.
Okay, Lori has her hand up.
Lori?
Oh, hang on. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Actually, I was gonna leave. So
Okay. Okay.
I was hitting leave the meeting, Arthur, but
All right.
thank you. And
All right.
thank you for talking about walkability.
Yeah.
Have a good night, everyone.
Oh, you're just waving goodbye.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to hit leave.
All right.
Okay.
So I think Larry had his hand up, so I'll start there. Okay.
Yes, I would ask that if you could consider, along with what John Sherrill was suggesting, that part of the maintenance would be to paint all the crosswalks in Martin's Addition. It will cost very little. If you're going to do any major repaving issues, we really need to find out what's going on with those damaged gas lines and the fire hydrants before we start.
So I did have a conversation with WSSC about the fire hydrants, and they gave me the sort of the lowdown on how their program works. They do inspections, so they inspect every hydrant once every 3 years is what they say they do. In terms of flushing hydrants or things like that, they only do that in response to consistent or discolored water. So they don't flush them preventatively. They do it in response to issues. And so that so I got some clarity on that. I think in terms of what you're saying about Washington Gas, I think the idea of doing a whole repaving, the last repaving is my understanding was done in like 2018, 2017.
Right.
So I'm not sure if a full repaving is what this time is about. Much more, in my view, and again, this is to try to focus on that maintenance aspect and potential improvements. So that's the way that I viewed this one. And then in a couple of years, the repaving would come around again to mill and pave. And then at that point, we would be dealing with repaving the streets. Does that make sense?
I think we repave the streets every 20 years.
Yeah.
And I think you're right that the last time we repaved them was about 3 or 4 years ago. So
Yeah.
we're still a good ways out of a full repaving.
Right.
Well, yeah, but on the maintenance issue, we've got these houses that are
Mhm.
creating all the problems right there on Taylor where the gas leaks are.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I was just suggesting we be careful how much paving we do till that's fixed.
Oh, certainly.
But Niles, in the past years, we got the same baloney from WSSC that they inspect every 3 years. We asked for the records of that. They could not produce them. They don't do it. So
Certainly.
ask for the records.
Certainly, I think that was something that I thought about as well as asking when the last time they did ours. So that can be the next follow-up that I do there. Okay?
Yeah. Because I'm pretty sure we can get the right to flush them. And believe me, what took that house down on Summit was the sediment in the hose from the hydrant never being flushed.
Right.
So that's
right.
important.
Okay. All right. Okay. Then I think the next I see is Marty. So we're going to go there.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to go back to some questions that remain unanswered, at least to me. Will the election committee do 100% report on the votes this year? That's sort of a yes or no question.
And let me see.
Because that's not what the vote counting document said. I would like the report to do what we've done in prior years, which is to include an account of any ballots rejected, any ballot envelopes rejected and the reasons why, a number of votes rejected and the reasons why, the number of votes not cast, left blank on undercounted ballots. In other words, a full report. I mean, really 100% reporting of what came in. And we didn't really get an answer to that, so I'm asking again.
Including votes for Mickey Mouse.
Including the votes for Mickey Mouse. Remember we had the vote for Sully Sullenberger one year? But yeah, we accounted for all the votes. And I think that that's really important to do this year. So it's a yes or no question. 100% reporting is our standard practice.
All right. I think.
I'm not sure.
I think that's an election committee question.
It's an
If they
election
want to.
committee issue, but I don't know if anyone's on.
George is there.
Oh, hey,
Yeah, I'm
George.
going to ask George to unmute. I think.
Yeah, so I think in the template that is put out for what the election report looks like it would be, I think that includes the space where, yeah, we explain total number of votes cast, we account for what all of the votes were and all of the write-ins, correct? I think we didn't write into the template building in reporting on presuming that there are going to be disqualified ballots because we don't know that there are going to be. I do know that it is transparent because that portion of where we discuss disqualifying any ballot envelopes, disqualifying any individual ballots is part of the observed portion of the counting. So people are there and would be able to witness any ballots that did wind up being disqualified. And yeah, I think we had agreed that there would be a total. We're reporting on not just the vote count per candidate, but also the total votes cast.
Well, that doesn't include the votes not cast, which is what is an important piece of electoral information to know whether you've got 10 undervoted ballots or 100 undervoted ballots. So I'm asking you to do what we've done in prior years, which is to report the votes cast for candidates, the votes cast for write-ins, the votes not cast, undervoted ballots, the number of ballots and votes that were disqualified and the reasons, and in this case, the number of ballot envelopes. Last year, we reported that there were no ballot envelopes disqualified. I hope that's true again this year, but if there are 10 ballot envelopes that are disqualified because of the, signatures or whatever on the form on the outside of the envelope, that's important information, and I would certainly encourage you to do 100% reporting of all the data, and that includes total votes, cast and not cast, and the status of all ballot envelopes, rejected or accepted, the number of each, and the reasons why some were rejected. Again, a full report. I think the community is used to that. I think people expect that, and I think it's really necessary. So I'm asking for a commitment. Please say yes.
I'm not going to speak for Anna and Tiffany. I think that's modifications to that is something that we as a committee would need to be voting on collectively. I'm not going to take on the responsibility and say what and speak for them. I can tell you, I'm fully supportive of making sure that we are providing a full, robust report and ensuring that there is plenty of transparency in the counting procedure and that we are maintaining that transparency that is part of the village tradition. But I'm not going to say the committee is going to do one thing or another because I'm not the committee.
I appreciate that, George, and I appreciate the support for the full reporting. You'll need to change the template that you had on your document that was adopted tonight, because your template is not complete. And I thank you for going back to the committee and doing a more complete report. For a sample template, look at the election reports that we issued in 2018, 19, and 20. They include all the information that is required. And so if you use the same format we've used the last 3 years, I'll be happy to send those to you. You probably already have them.
I have them, and I can say that we reviewed them when we were developing the template for this year and incorporated them as much as kind of was appropriate at the time.
Now go back and look again, thanks. I appreciate very much your commitment to actually doing a full report like we did the last 5 years. Thank you.
And then I think Andrew had I'm asking you to unmute it. There we go.
Thanks, Niles. Thank you, Niles. Look, since this is presumably the last council meeting before the votes are counted, I just wanted to say that I truly appreciate the council's hard work and volunteer time. I know everyone's heart is in the right place, and while I disagree with some of the decisions, I still thank you for your service, and I want to thank the outgoing members, Katya and Todd, as well. So I appreciate you indulging in all our questions and your patience, and can't wait for the vote counting to begin. Thanks so much.
Yep.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right. Yep. I got you, Susan. Yeah.
So I just wanted to make one more, a little circle back to that thing earlier about the ZTA.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're thinking about funding or budgeting, Arthur, the funds for legal counsel around telecommunications law is high, and of course I know our own lawyer, but I think it's really important to get that counsel for this ZTA to see how it's going to affect our village, and to have some informed understanding of that is worth it. And it'll be a lot cheaper than the potential things that could come out of the placement of cell towers. And I just wanted to say that I know Katya and others did an amazing job on those light poles, that people really cared about creating or putting something here that was appropriate, proportionate, the curve, the historic look. It went with our neighborhood. It goes with the kind of streetscape, the trees, it's a certain height, but it's not out of proportion. These cell tower placements in other neighborhoods in our county, I've seen them. I've talked to people, living in homes with them right in front of them. You can see them. They're not proportioned. They don't look the same. It will totally affect the way that our area looks. And I think that it's not like we're telling people not to do something. I'm just really encouraging you. I mediate conflicts in the community, in the courts, in the schools, and in the community with homeowners associations, neighbor to neighbor, etc. And I can tell you the number of conflicts that are going to be coming down, if you have 30 foot and more that you can put cell towers in front of a home, you'll have immediate conflicts between neighbors, between neighbors and the council, already they've come up on our listserv about, you know, the reason we don't have, you know, good communications here is because Chevy Chase Village, you know, doesn't allow antennas for plain old 3G service. Well, that also tells us Chevy Chase Village is somewhat active around not having cell antennas within their borders. But you don't need a 5G cell antenna in front of your home to get better cell reception anyway. That's another issue. But I just want to say that it's not like we're saying don't have any 5G. We've already got 5G. It's just the idea for residential areas of making it 30 feet from your home is going to flood you know, the opportunity to put them everywhere. And at 60 feet, which it currently is, it doesn't. Right now there's harmony. Right now you don't have those conflicts, and you don't realize how easy it is to get those conflicts if something like this ZTA passes at the county level. And so if we could just also say priorities for deployment along major roadways, that would push it towards Connecticut Avenue, which is 65 feet above, and that's what's usually done. But if they start doing Brookville Road, or you can easily have conflicts between the residents of our village on Brookville Road and all the other residents, because the other ones are going to go, oh, you should put it on Brookville Road, that's bigger. But if we actually can get together at the outset and say our priorities for where the placement, our priorities as a village, and we think the master plan for our county, which is being worked on about where they should be placed, they are trying to say it should be highways and major roadways, which is 65 feet and above, which would be Connecticut Avenue, and that is the distance that's needed for 5G. We can get it from there. We don't need it in front of our homes at 30 feet. But I just think if we can kind of push for that, and for oversight, fixing the broken oversight system, because we don't want something to go in here and then people are complaining to Niles can't do anything, blah, 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 you know, lawsuits. I think we really need that kind of for our own harmony. And then finally, for property values, the impact to property values, you have to understand that seeing a cell tower within view of a home has a direct, there's evidence of that there. So this is not, you know, it's not just stuff in the air. Now, some people don't worry about health. They do worry about health. Who cares? It will affect property values, and the main asset that people have in this village as homeowners is your home. And so anyway, there's a lot of things at stake. And I just think, you know, getting out in front of it now and saying, hey, you know, this ZTA, we've got some concerns about it. The fact that you can put a cell tower within 30 feet and there's 0 resident input and 0 public hearings. This is going to be, you know, an issue. It's going to take a big hit on our community harmony and the whole issue of equity. Who has it in front of their house? Who doesn't? Why did they get it? Why didn't, you know, this other person get it? It's just going to open a big can of worms. At 60 feet, there's only 2 or 3 places in our entire village where you could put those cell towers. At 30 feet, it's just it creates a big mess. So anyway, thank you for being attentive to it, and hopefully the lawyers and others can help with that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at this point, I think we are ready to adjourn. Does anyone wish to make a motion? Arthur.
Hang on, I'm going to ask him to unmute.
Let's adjourn.
Second.
All right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Yeah. I'm just going to go ahead and end the meeting for all that way. Nobody has to worry about it. Okay.